All right, good afternoon. It is May 24th, and we are just about to hit the heat of the summer. We are at that Memorial Day weekend stage. Some of us may have Monday off, some of us just starting to get into the battle. We have started to warm up somewhat noticeably, and I'd expect that the problems will follow. Now, if we stay dry, things might be relatively straightforward, but if we put some moisture in there, then for sure all of our problems will continue to arise. Online today, we've got Dr. Dave Gardner, Dr. Carr, Dr. Xiaowei Wu, and the inimitable Pamela Sherratt. Pamela, take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Oh, no, good afternoon. I'm used to it being a morning turf team times, obviously. Okay, so I just have a few slides to go through. And you started off talking about weather, Ed, and we have a rainy forecast, a stormy holiday weekend forecast. Storms tomorrow, storms Sunday, rain Monday. And so I think sometimes it's easy to, if you've got seed out or sod out, to think, well, the rain's taking care of it. But like stringing is still important, even if we have these timely rains. If that seed isn't kept in a constant state of moisture, even if after it's germinated, it can die. And so those seedlings are very, you've got to micromanage them. You've got to micromanage the seed. Stringing cycles several times a day. So, for example, it rained very heavily here last night, and I was out here this morning stringing newly seeded areas. So this was a picture of a high school that I took many years ago, where they spent a lot of money and did a great renovation. And this was just before school was out for the summer, which, by the way, is next week. Our high schools will go out next week. So the importance of having somebody there to watch what's going on, even though they had covered this field with straw, as you can see, to try and conserve some of that moisture, they had a lot of runoff and washout. And so there are really great tools out there to conserve moisture. You can put the seed into the top inch of soil with, some kind of seeder or core aerator prior to. You can cover with things like hydromulch or straw or carpet type or sheet type covers. So there are all kinds of things that you can do, but the most important thing is that somebody keeps their eyes on these new seedings, especially at the high school level. We want to avoid situations like this. So I wanted just to share a quick story. We have some areas in my yard that were quite low. They were, we have dogs and kids, and they were quite low. And we inadvertently applied a crabgrass preventer about 4 weeks ago in an area that we knew we needed to seed. And so it was a big box store, crabgrass preventer plus fertilizer, a 2403. It had a dithiopyr in it, which is about a 10-week re-entry before you can seed again. So what I did was I went out and I got some high quality topsoil, and I filled those areas with about 2 inches of high quality soil. And I seeded 100% perennial ryegrass into those areas. This is 12-day-old ryegrass. It's looking great right now. I think at some point those roots are going to hit that chemical barrier. In talking with Dr. Gardner, our weed scientists, we could end up in a situation where those roots hit that chemical barrier and stop, and they might either be pruned or it might kill the grass. I don't know what's going to happen. But I think it's just an interesting observation to see. It may be that I have to water this more now because this grass will have shallow roots. We had a conversation about the fate of that pesticide chemical barrier. Because I've buried it in 2 inches of soil, will it hang around longer than if it was at the surface, etc. So anyway, it's just an interesting thing that I'm going to watch, and hopefully I'm hoping for success, but I'll keep you guys informed. And then finally, I just want to mention several things that are happening in the next few months. So the professional grounds managers are having a field day on June the 13th. There's a QR code there that you can scan to register for that. Dr. Tyler Carr and I will be speaking at that in the afternoon. We hope that some of you can make it. The Ohio Sports Field Managers Association have their summer field day at the Cincinnati Reds on June 26th. You can register through the Ohio Turfgrass Foundation for that. There is limited space, so get on that sooner rather than later. Our OSU field day, our research field day is August the 13th. And the fall sports field managers conference is going to be at the Scott's Miracle Grow. We're going to visit and see, how they make the fertilizers and what technology they've got coming up through the pipeline. So these great conferences. And then, of course, our Ohio Turfgrass Foundation conference, December 9th through 12th. The turf team is working diligently on putting together a first-class education program for you guys. We're also going to have a seminar on wheels this year, which we're really excited about. So more information on that to come. And with that, I will hand over my time. Thank you, Dr. Nangle.
Nangle and Pamela, ceding your time back. One thing to make note of is soil temperatures are somewhere between 70 and 80 degrees, folks. Be careful, because that's going to cause problems. Dr. Carr.
All right. Oh, I just knocked something over. So when Pam was going on, there was a tree outside my window that fell. So it threw me off for a second there. And nobody's cutting anything down. So it just fell. It's not that windy. So I'm going to talk about a couple key cultural practices that we have going on right now, and that will continue. So mowing's big right now. Grass does not need any help growing in many cases. And with all the rain that we've had, you may be getting behind in mowing areas. I've talked to many people who have had a hard time. It rains a lot, the grass gets really tall, they want to hack it down, and then they want to remove those clippings because it creates a big mess. We typically recommend leaving those clippings on the turf after you mow. I understand if you're removing a lot of material, that can be challenging. So my recommendation is to let when you're able to mow, go ahead and mow. Leave that material on top for a day or so, let it dry, and then go back over it and mow and let those clippings disperse. So that's a good way to keep that material there. It's that time of year where I see a lot of my neighbors with brown paper bags on the side of the road with a lot of clippings, and let's leave those on the turf. The next part would be irrigation. If you have a irrigation controller and you have high cut turf, the clock should probably be off at this point. We're well above normal in terms of rainfall. There's lots of available moisture in the root zone. Even some golf course fairways could probably get away with turning irrigation off until things start to dry out a little bit more. And if you're in professional turf, specifically golf courses with sand-based putting greens, if you haven't put a wetting agent application out yet, now's the time to start those applications for the year. Just follow your whatever preferred products you have. I know different products behave differently. If you put that product out, follow the label for how much irrigation you should be applying. And I know sometimes it will say 2/10 to 1/3 of an inch. That can be a lot of water. And you're putting a lot of water out at once. It starts to pond, and it can be concerning, but it's necessary to move that material down through the root zone. And then the last piece is going to be fertilization. We're nearing the heat of the summer. We don't want to add too high of rates of quick release fertilizer sources like urea or ammonium sulfate. If you want to put a fertilizer out now, I'd go with lower rates, things that are predominantly slow release. We typically don't want to put out high rates of anything right now that can lead to increased disease pressure potentially. But having a little bit of fertilization applied before the summer can help your turf grow through or grow out of any of those stresses. But not, we don't want it growing excessively to where you're potentially causing other issues. So that's what I have. There's a lot going on right now in terms of weather. I know that some of you are going to talk about disease. Don't give the environment, or don't give the surface more water than it needs. That can lead to further problems down the road.
Thank you, Dr. Carr. Next, Dr. Wu.
Good afternoon, everyone. So today I just want to briefly mention about two of the past problems. Let me share the screen. Okay. So one thing I want to mention is the bill bugs. So we have been seeing bill bug activities a peak in the past 2 weeks. We have been seeing quite some numbers in our P4 traps. And meanwhile, this Monday was noticed bill bug mating as seen in this picture. So adulticides can be sprayed to prevent them from laying eggs, and insecticides containing pyrethroids can be good options. And assumably in the next month or so, they will become larvae. At that time, they will spray larvicide, but I will put some updates later on. Another thing is the anti-bluegrass weevil. This is damage showing. You can see the images here. So this we're taking from actually our field trials. You can see the damage in the buffer areas, which is non-treated between treatment plots. And in the left is a picture taken last Monday. And on the right side, it's taking actually today. So in the past couple of days, the damage has progressed significantly. And the novel picture in the corner was taken from our last visit at the same time as the pictures on the left showing the damage. And so also I have received emails from a couple of golf course superintendents from Cincinnati and Mount Vernon areas, and they are talking about the ABW have also reached the pupal stage. So curative larvicide should be applied to prevent this damage getting worse and for rescue treatment. Meanwhile, before you do any spray, I would suggest you take a scout of the problem, make sure that the pests are there, because they can be confusing with other problems of the grass. It can be disease or other stress. So make sure it's the pests are actually there before you do any treatment. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. Dr. Gardner.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. So as we're coming towards the end of May and the start of June, I'm assuming that people are very far along on treating their broadleaf weeds, but just some reminders that some of our newer, more innovative combination chemistries include ester formulations, which even though some of those are advertised to work in temperatures up to 90 degrees, the thing is that the warmer it is, sometimes the more likely it is that you're not going to be entirely satisfied with the control that you get with the product, because you'll have premature volatilization or evaporation drying on the surface of the weed leaf, and you won't get as good a control as you would like. So if you're going to use products that contain esters, I would gravitate towards those times of the day that it is a little bit cooler. So, early morning would probably be preferable. Or just wait, like next week here in Central Ohio, we're supposed to have a couple of days with highs in the 60s, and just spray those products then. I have gotten emails this week about our friend, the terrestrial orchid. So this is the scientific name of it, and this is what it looks like when it's in bloom. So pretty. But see, the thing is that this picture here, this is one that we buy and we grow on purpose, but there are other terrestrial orchids that are, unwelcome guests in our landscape. This is an example of one of them. And see, the thing is that particular one, it's called broadleaf helleborine. It's not a broadleaf weed, even though it's called broadleaf helleborine, and it's also not a grass. The bottom line is that the chemical industry isn't trying real hard to come up with herbicides that can kill orchids, right? So those really expensive plants that you normally buy in flower shops that are attached to a piece of wood, right? Most of those, chemical companies aren't trying real hard to figure out how to control those. So what to do? The thing that you have to remember is that it is a monocot, but it's not a grass. So most of our broadleaf herbicides are not going to work, but sulfentrazone has some activity. okay? And then also glyphosate. So if you have it in a landscaping bed, glyphosate would probably be your first choice. If you have it in turf, I would try sulfentrazone first, since that is a selective herbicide. But either of those two products should hopefully give you a little bit of relief against that particular plant. Another thing to point out is that at this stage of the year, if you have crabgrass, it's probably about 2 to 4 leaf in your turf surfaces. Now, maybe a little bit further along, close to heat sinks, sidewalks, driveways, landscape beds, and etc. But it's probably about 2 to 4 leaf, and it's not very big. Goosegrass should be even smaller. So compared to the tip of the pen there, you see that goosegrass is also 2 to 4 leaf, but it is pretty small at this point. So if you see something like this poking out of the ground, that's not crabgrass, that's not goosegrass, that is our friend field past palem. Okay, so that's one of our newer grassy weed species that we see. And unlike crabgrass and goosegrass that you can control with a pre-emergence herbicide, field past palem is a perennial. And so if you see this, you're not going to be able to map these areas out and put down a pre-emerge next year and think that that's going to do anything. But remember that topramazone is quite active against this particular weed. So try that, but remember that you might have to treat more than once, particularly if you treat later this summer. Come back in the spring and see whether or not you have regrowth. But this is something that we're starting to see quite a bit of, is the field past palem starting to come back in. And again, since it's a perennial, it's not tiny little seedling leaves, but it's big, fat, half, 3/4 inch wide, 5-inch long leaves just suddenly poking out of the ground. Okay. Something else that I've had calls about this week is it rough bluegrass or creeping bentgrass? And so both of those are lighter colored patches in the turf. Both of them produce stolons. Both of them have a tall membranous ligule. But if you look a little bit closer, creeping bentgrass has a pointed leaf tip. Rough bluegrass is boat-shaped. Rough bluegrass is folded when the leaves emerge. Creeping bentgrass, the leaves unroll. When you look at rough bluegrass, it has a smooth leaf blade with a midrib, whereas creeping bentgrass doesn't have a midrib, but it has relatively coarse venation. The point is that you want to be able to figure out which one you're dealing with, because if it's creeping bentgrass, you can use mesotrione to selectively remove that, but we don't generally start that till later in the summer. But if it's rough bluegrass, Velocity PM, this is the latest attempt to market bispyrobacter sodium in this part of the country, but this is labeled for the control of both annual and rough bluegrass. You can use it on lawns, athletic fields, tees, fairways. The caveat here is that it's perfectly safe on perennial ryegrass and tall fescue. With Kentucky bluegrass, depending on the type of Kentucky bluegrass, it can be quite safe, or it can be really, really injurious. And so what I would do if you're interested in trying this is to test it out in a very small area first to make sure that it's safe to your particular cultivar of Kentucky bluegrass. But know that that is a selective option potentially for control. There are other broadleaf weeds that are also labeled on the Velocity label, but we've got a lot of other combination products that for now we use for that purpose. What I want to close with, I was walking my dog this morning and I was across the street and I saw this. This is red thread, right? And so up close, I was like, ooh, cotton candy, so pretty. But this was actually yesterday morning. And then today, I saw this, and what popped into my head, do you remember that Paul McCartney song from like 1983, Ebony and Ivory? So you've got dollar spot on one side of the picture and you've got red thread on the other side of the picture. And it's like, wow, that is really cool. Now, normally, if I try to talk about things associated with plant pathology, there was a fellow used to work here. His name was Mike Bayman. He'd be like, Dave, I'm employed as the plant pathologist. You don't need to pretend you know anything about turf diseases. You can defer all of that stuff to me. Well, he's not here anymore. And Todd Hicks isn't here today either. And so I'm hoping that Ed Nangle, because of his vast experience with Chicago District, he might be able to provide us some insight as to why I'm doing this.
Hell of an introduction there, Dave.
Right.
Yeah, usually those two diseases are tied to low input lawns. And so my question back to you is, has that fine gentleman done anything with that lawn in recent times?
That fella has not fertilized his lawn in the whole of the time that he has lived there, which is 8 years. So, the thing that I would say is that both of those are diseases of low fertilization. And so, yeah, throwing a little bit of nitrogen on would probably help considerably. But I'm under the impression also that we see more of that on home lawns now because our weather is more conducive. Like there's a larger time of the year that we have really high humidity at night. And like the temperature range is just, it's there's more days that there's an opportunity for those diseases to develop, whereas we didn't used to really care about diseases on home lawns, and now it's like it can be a pretty big deal.
Well, interestingly, the red thread window seems to have extended. I do see it more into late June, early July here in Northern Ohio on lawns, which is probably a lot further or later in the year than probably would have been seen previously. The other thing to remember is that where you see red thread, the inimitable Joe Rimmelsbach would always tell you that when you see red thread, dollar spot's going to follow into those places because red thread has weakened the turf, right? And so they're both somewhat opportunistic in that sense, that if the turf is not growing optimally or with the most vigor, then there's an opportunity for it. The other thing I would always say is that, particularly with dollar spot, it's kind of like a Goldilocks disease. Too little nitrogen leaves you with problems. Too much nitrogen can also be problematic. So it's one of those that, if you see it, it doesn't mean you go and dump out 4 pounds of nitrogen because you think you've under fertilized. It's one of those that maybe it's a moisture issue, and maybe a little bit of nitrogen might be more helpful. There are some products available to the homeowner industry, but the majority of the higher quality products, if you want to call them that, might be classified as restricted use pesticides. So that is going to need a licensed applicator if you want to take a run at controlling it. The other thing to remember with dollar spot in particular is that as it continues to get hotter and hotter, there will be some natural suppression. So once you get above that kind of 83 degrees at daytime, those temperatures start to push back. Now, nighttime temperatures are also going to have an impact on that. So again, you'll see the dollar spot is active in June into early July, and more than likely temperatures then get too warm, and then we see a return as we get into the latter part of August, running through the end of September for dollar spot activity. One other thing, Dave, changing tack, we are playing a little bit with velocity for safety on some of the bent grasses. Did you do any work back in the day with velocity at those ultra low rates?
It's funny that you say that because they're also doing a little bit of work here on campus with velocity, and they asked me that same question, and the reply is that while I usually have the thrill and honor of testing, every herbicide that's eventually released, that's one that I've never really tested in a controlled setting. So I have absolutely no experience with it, which
I know, and go back to the
feels so inadequate. It really does.
And go back to the days in Chicago. I know that some of the guys were going at ultra low rates on the fairways, in particular with specific cultivars. So I just want to see if with some of these newer bentgrass cultivars at tee or fairway height, if there is some potential.
Yeah, the other really tricky thing is that on Kentucky bluegrass, it depends on the lineage of the bluegrass. You know how bluegrass, you can split it out into the 8 or 9 different categories of blue,
Right.
and you can get back to the how they were bred and what the parents were. So there's some of them that velocity is perfectly safe on. There's others that it's like they're going to die before the weed does. And so it really is a, when in doubt, try it out, but preferably on a test area that nobody else can see, to determine whether or not it's going to work.
Or at least let us kill some stuff.
Well, and I mean, the other thing is, like for a residential setting, there's not too many home lawns that don't include a little bit of Kentucky bluegrass too. But I think in that instance, that's usually going to be cultivars that are going to be relatively resilient to the herbicide. But I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. It's nice that there's actually potentially a selective control option. We just have to, we need a little bit more time to, figure out where and when we can use it.
Good stuff. Okay, with that, folks, we're going to wrap it up. Do be aware that we're aiming to be weekly for the rest of the summer now until the end of August. We'll have a couple of Turf Team Times live as well, so that we'll send it out. And you get to come and make us look silly with questions. Once we kind of get ourselves organized, we'll get those dates out to you. But as always, if you have questions, buckeyeturf@osu.edu. Also, Dr. Carr has done an excellent job with buckeyeturf.osu.edu, the website, and then you got the various X or Twitter handles, or whatever you want to call it, and then the podcasts as well. Feel free to reach out. We will try and answer questions as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Thank you. We'll talk to you all next week.